You're with Dr. Sustainability. So this episode is with Professor Calvin Jones, a leading economist in the area of sustainability. Welcome to the episode.
Thank you very much, Liz. Yeah.
You're currently at a crossroad leaving academia. I thought it'd be a brilliant time to sit down with you to see where you are with things, your current experience, where you've been in terms of the economy, sustainability, and where you see things moving forward. Part of the episode isn't just to look at concepts and themes, it's also to get to know you. So could you give me a background in terms of your upbringing and how you took that journey into academia?
So I'm probably the most values Welsh person you'll come across. I suspect your entire life. Born in the Rhondda, the famous Coal Valley.
So South Wales Valley.
South Wales Valleys, brought up working class household. My granddad's a coal miner, my great granddad's a railwayman, my dad's a factory worker, comprehensive school. Did okay, marked me out for A-levels and then university, and ended up working after doing a degree in economics and politics, ended up working in a council, and then really coincidentally did a project on the Rugby World Cup, which was in Cardiff in 1999. We did that project with the university. After we did that that assessment of the economic impact of that sports event, the university team asked me to join them. So I really entered academia accidentally in many ways. Didn't really expect ever to be an academic. I was solid kind of sportsman to university, never really excelled in any way, and entered academia without a PhD. So not really knowing what it was about at all. Spent the first 3 months thinking people were going to give me work, and nobody did. And I realised you have to find your own research agenda. You have to, start writing your own papers, find your own contracts, and so on. And once I started that process, I realised it was in many ways the perfect job for me because I'm interested in things. I like writing. I like talking, as you may have noticed. I talk a lot, and the academics get to do all those things. So it was very much accidental and really out of the ordinary for my family and my community, because I'm the second one in my family ever to go to university. My uncle went after the Second World War when the RAF paid for him to go. So a series of accidents that saw me be an economist in the business school in Cardiff for 26 years, which finished earlier this year.
Okay, so you mentioned obviously your studies with economics and also politics. How did that come about?
Well, I think partially because although I'm an economist, my maths isn't good enough to be a proper economist. Because economists are notoriously quantitative. We love a good model. I got to a certain level and realised that I was never going to be able to contribute at that kind of hard cutting edge of the very mathematical, financial, macroeconomics. And I was much more naturally inclined to storytelling, to explaining things to people, whether it's students, policymakers, practitioners, on blogs, trying to persuade people of the right thing to do based on economic evidence. So I naturally ended up in a place where politics and civic society were natural outlets for me. And the other thing, of course, is that a lot of economics, it's very theoretical, it's very abstract, and actually either impacts the world.
Abstract in what sense? Because when I think of economists, I think they're very ingrained with what's happening. They have a model, but then they shape it for society.
Absolutely not. That's not what happens. I mean, they have a model and they try and shape society to fit their model. Okay. And the bits of society that don't fit their model, they throw away.
No. Oh.
So this is in a way I'm telling some dirty secrets now, but most economic models require a very, very broad breadth, crude view of the world. So, for example, we have to assume that people typically behave rationally. So, given a certain set of choices, you will do the thing that adds most to your well-being.
Yes.
Now, if that was the case, then cigarettes would never exist or have existed, because we would never smoke, because that's a very irrational thing to do, smoke a cigarette, or make inappropriate bets on the horses, or many other things. These sorts of behaviours are very difficult to fit into what I'd call mainstream versions of economics.
Yeah.
But what the argument of economists is, well, when you add millions of people together, they end up behaving more or less in aggregate in a rational way. And even that's not true. You can see, for example, if you look at the behaviour of where I live, the Welsh valleys during the Brexit referendum, the part of the UK and one of the parts of Europe the most benefited by European funds voted to leave the European Union.
Yeah.
And that was a gut emotional reaction to decades of economic.
But could that have also been down to lack of education? That people didn't connect what they benefit from there to be connected to Europe?
So the connection was clear and obvious.
Okay.
The problem was people felt patronised by that connection. So look at the wonderful things we're doing for you. We're going to give you this lovely road. We're going to give you this lovely business park. We're going to educate your children or improve your skills. And people don't like to be patronised.
Okay.
So that reaction was certainly in part a reaction to the relationship with Europe, but also a reaction to what had happened in Britain over 40 years prior to that, whereby my part of the world, the South Wales Valleys, had been in many ways excluded from the national conversation,
Yes.
which became about enterprise and entrepreneurship and became more centrist than what we would consider, from my historic perspective, more right-wing compared to our socialist leanings, if you like, or communitarian leanings. So it was that reaction of 1 million people in the valleys was a reaction which was a gut reaction, not one which was born out of thinking genuinely that Britain outside the European Union would be better off, or the valleys would be better off than they were inside. So even at aggregate levels, people behave really weirdly, and economists struggle to include that in models. And so what you
Why?
because it's almost impossible to model it mathematically. Therefore, you end up with things which simply don't A, make sense, and B, aren't any use in making policy.
So what you're really saying is economists are not in touch with society if they're looking mainstream with models and theories, and that causes issues if you're trying to actually model it against society.
Yes, and the problem you have is that economists tend to go where the data are best, not where the problems are largest.
Yeah.
So if you look at
Is that because they're just a bit lazy?
yeah, I mean, I think, and some problems are genuinely intractable. They genuinely are very difficult to solve with numbers.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm being very general here. There are elements of economics, behavioural economics, for example, ecological economics, like myself, and which are trying to grapple with these problems. But generally speaking, if you want to get on and publish in a really top quality journal, then you typically will work in a narrowish range of areas, which sometimes don't really have that much to do with how people's well-being are, is generally affected. So a good example is maybe something like innovation. So there isn't a quantitative model of innovation in economics. Economists don't know how and why innovation happens, but it's really important.
Yes.
And because we don't have a model of innovation, we can't predict innovation and we can't encourage innovation. So what you find then is that there's lots of talk about how innovation happened, for example, in the Industrial Revolution or in the PC revolution, and we can measure what happened in the past. We don't really understand why it happened in the way it did, or then how that innovation ripples out across the world between different parts of society. And we can't then make predictions about future innovation or how to make that innovation, quote unquote, societally better.
Okay.
So there are big gaps, I think, in this science as well.
So talk me through the different types of economists' work, because you obviously said you might not be the mainstream economist. So what are the different sets of work that people might be working on at the moment?
So there are a number of big blocky kind of themes in economics. The one that we are most familiar with from the news is what we call macroeconomics, which is the economics of big economies.
Yes.
And this is about trying to predict GDP, which again is back to, can we work out what we think innovation might look like in the future, because innovation drives economic growth. And so that's, what Rachel Reeves will have to deal with on a daily basis in terms of...
That's what I think of
when I think of economics, is the big kind of...
the chunky data. This is what happens.
Typically UK level or European level or US level. And that's the most visible and, in many ways, the most well-developed part of economics. And there's lots of work behind those sorts of analyses and forecasts, which again is very, very complicated, very quantitative. So that's one block of economics. Another block of economics, which is well established, is labour economics. So now that, I think, and they're very good colleagues of mine in the business school, as was, who do really good work on, for example, looking at gender pay gaps and pay premium for different sort of skill levels and how there's different between men and women. Lots of good work in my foreign business school on disability and how disability affects your ability to learn, ethnicity, other personal characteristics. Now that I think is closer to the cold face of what matters, because that has genuine policy importance. And then when you're looking at something like what Donald Trump is doing in America, you can see how that is so far away from the evidence of how people actually experience work and progress in work or don't progress in work, and the genuine reality of how your personal characteristics affect your career when you strip out all the other bits and pieces and just look at whether you are black or white or male or female or old or young, or disabled or able-bodied, and you can then tell from that work, again, quantitative work, big data sets, that these things really do matter. And therefore you need policies which, push back against that. So that labour economics is a really interesting part of the kind of landscape as well. My own area then, I'd say, well, two areas really. The first would be what you might call environmental and ecological economics, which is how does the financial system and how the financial system then reflects and supports our material prosperity sit within the planet, the set of environmental resources we have, and how do those things interact. And then the other part of my job then is where, again, my economics bleeds into policy and civic society is regional economics, economic geography, regeneration, poverty, those sorts of areas. How and why is it that economic prosperity is unevenly distributed across space? So why is it that the place I'm from remains poor and has remained poor for the last 50 years, whereas London has been rich for the last 500 years? And there's long and enduring disparities in the way the opportunities people have, which leads to issues around social cohesion and issues around the Brexit vote. A great example of that. Brexit vote, I think, is largely explained by deprivation. So those for me have real resonance simply because of my personal background and where I'm from.
Could you give us more information about some of the projects that you've worked on in that area?
Yes, so I've done a wide variety of things. I think the most interesting thing at the moment I'm involved in is a bunch of projects around what the Welsh government has now called foundational economy. So how can we make more use of and get more value from a set of activities and resources which are embedded in our case, Wales and Welsh landscape. So if you look at, for example, timber and wood supply, if you look at food supply and nutrition, if you look at energy generation and use, in all those areas, we have a real mismatch between the stuff we produce in Wales and what gets used in Wales. And a lot of value in those systems disappears from Wales. So if you think, for example, about the food system, 95% of the food that we grow in Wales is exported. 95% of the food that we eat in Wales is imported. So there is no food system in Wales.
No, not connected.
Not connected. There's a produce system which grows largely beef and dairy and sheep, and that's exported. And there's a nutrition system which imports food to be eaten. And what that means is the farmers, because we don't have a functional and high value system, farmers are struggling to find markets. People are struggling to find high nutrition, sustainable food, and we've not been able to match those things. And my interest is, can we match different sectors in ways which create more value in Wales whilst remaining respectful of environmental limits?
But taking that example, is it vital to connect it all on all topics? For example, there's going to be some products you can't grow in.
It's a very good question.
So when you think about it, there's some products you will produce that you can't actually grow here. So people are obviously importing for a reason. When it comes to export, maybe they're getting a better price, and that's what they're benefiting from by doing so.
It's absolutely right. So I think in each case and for every product, there is a continuum of complete self-reliance and then complete import reliance or export reliance if you're a producer. And there's a sweet spot on that continuum for every product or service or activity or resource. At the moment, I would argue that all the signals in the environment tell us we are too far towards the globalized exporting, importing part of side of that pendulum, if you like, because we're typically not paying the full environmental costs. Of, so, for example, if I go into a large supermarket and buy some Pink Lady apples, and those apples will come from New Zealand or Australia or South Africa or Argentina, depending on how the seasons go, where in the Southern Hemisphere they can be grown, they're imported in my supermarket. The environmental cost of that process is much higher than it would be for a seasonal piece of fruit that I might buy. And it's not being costs are not fully incorporated in the price. So I think that in some cases there is absolutely an argument for more relocalization. In other cases, let's say the coffee of Europe came from Africa rather than South America, and the coffee of America, North America, from South America. Just from a purely energy perspective, at the moment, that's not what happens. The coffee comes from wherever it's cheapest to buy. And cheapest meaning not including all the, not necessarily even fair trade or, high welfare coffee. So I think there is an argument that not necessarily self-reliance, but a moderate amount of relocalization would benefit the planet and potentially people. And I think the problem you have is for every sector, you are right to point out that that's a different argument. It's a different set of policies and it's a different balance between economic efficiency, environmental costs, local salaries, and so on. So it's complicated.
But when you start looking in a vacuum also, I guess there are other benefits that you can have. What COVID has shown us, obviously borders are closed, you still need an ecosystem to be able to supply locally. And we saw the example with PPE, but that could be obviously seen with food. If anything was to happen, borders were closed, we need to be resilient enough as a nation to be able to continue supplying ourselves, moving things about, and moving forward with our own economy and not being reliant in terms of exporting things in.
So that's and what we've got, of course, is because we built our supply chains for cheapness, not for resilience. We have lots of problems in that area. So it might be, for example, I know an example of a farmer in the middle of COVID who was pouring away milk at the same time as the village next door couldn't get milk because they didn't get the pasteurization of the milk that happened to get, so it wasn't legal to sell in the village. The pasteurization plant was a long way away, and that kind of, that issue around very kind of extended supply chains is a problem. In energy, for example, we've very successfully decarbonised the UK electricity grid. So the amount of carbon on the grid has collapsed in the last 10, 15 years very happily. But the vast majority of those wind farms that are driving that are in the North Sea, because that's where it's cheapest. So when the wind's not blowing in the North Sea, it is blowing in the Celtic Sea, there's no wind farm there to use that wind because we've not built for resilience. In that case, geographic resilience to make sure that we catch the wind wherever it is. We've just put the cheapest wind where, first, which is on the North Sea. So the next stage of the decarbonisation journey for the UK will be, okay, we've got lots of cheap wind offshore. We now need complementary energy sources. So when the wind's not blowing in the North Sea, there's other things that come on the stream. So that second level of the restructuring of supply chains and product supply is much more complicated than just doing cheapest first, I think.
But is that just as straightforward as just, for example, having wind farms in the Celtic Sea?
Well, I mean, to some extent...
Was there more thinking behind that we don't know about in terms of why they've been put in certain places beyond economic costs?
No, in the case of wind, it's very clearly just economic cost. Okay. So there was this what's called this contract for difference approaches in the UK energy supply system, which basically rewards companies who can bring in renewables at the cheapest per kilowatt hour cost. And that is typically nice shallow sea, build a big wind turbine there, send the power into the East Coast. Now the next stage will indeed be floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea, off South Wales, north of Devon. It's deeper, it's more stormy, so we need a different technology. But of course, the argument would be that you don't just need wind, you also need solar PV when the wind's not blowing, but the sun's out. You need onshore wind, which is can be close to communities, and and may sometimes require fewer pylons and wires. You need, I would argue, primarily the next thing is energy demand management, because we've not thought in the UK at all about actually managing how people use electricity and energy in ways which reduce the peak demand, so you don't need quite so many wind turbines and solar panels. So there will be a variety of complementary technologies that will have to come aboard to for the next big chunk to be taken out of the carbon burden of energy supply. Yeah.
Do you think they're close to coming to do that?
Not yet. I think that's because I think what we've seen with the new government, and I'm not at all party political.
You can be here.
Yeah, I'm genuinely not. Yeah, I have problems with them all equally, if I can put it like that. There's been a reluctance so far to talk about energy use, and
I'm surprised you say that, because they have a department heavily focusing on net zero and energy, and they've made a big focus for clean energy as well.
They have, yeah, but it's all on the supply side. So, for example, that big focus has not extended to any change in my gas or electricity bill, whereby it becomes cheaper if I use more. It's still the case if if you use more electricity, you don't get punished for it if you're a very high user in terms of the per kilowatt hour price. It's still the case that we have not managed to fashion any sort of retrofit program which tackles the hundreds of thousands and indeed millions of houses across the UK that need deep retrofit to be not just low carbon in their operation and low energy in their operation, but climate ready, so that they're also flood proofed, as well as being resilient in terms of their energy use, and they're comfortable in the winter and in the summer and so on. We've not really tackled that. You've not seen, the government has not doubled down on getting polluting cars off the road. If anything, the opposite, because they're not prepared to.
I thought they had with the push with electric cars.
That was the former government.
You mean the current government?
Current has not.
They've only just come in power.
Well, I mean, let's hope that your optimism is well placed. I think I'm a radical, right? I would if I was in power, everybody would be unhappy. I think, not just.
I don't think the environmentalists would be unhappy.
Well, possibly not. Maybe not the very radical ones. But I think that the focus on decarbonisation of the grid and the battery storage is brilliant, but it's 20% of the problem. 80% of the problem is how we use energy, and that's not really had a really thorough, holistic plan or strategy set out that I can see over 20 years.
Okay.
We will be using much less power in our houses, much less power in our transportation, much less power in our non-domestic buildings. Agriculture is the elephant in the room, because it's one of the 2 or 3 highest greenhouse gas sectors in Wales and across the UK.
Yes.
We need radical change in the way we use our land and how we manage our landscape in order to sequester carbon, as well as stop emitting methane and those things. Those things, so far, I don't see any evidence that they're being addressed holistically, either at UK or Wales level. I hope I'm wrong.
So if you were in power, what would you be doing? What's the straightforward answer here?
So I think that the first thing I would do if I was in power is I'd ensure that we had a decent evidence base, because we're making decisions at the moment based on very sketchy evidence. And one of the things I wrote about last year was...
You say sketch evidence, do you mean gut instincts here?
Well, I mean, it's slightly better than gut instincts. But if you think about it, so for example, right, we know much more in the UK about bats and newts than we do about soil quality. Why? Because bats and newts are legislated for in planning, as Richard Reid always complains about. So we know where they are, we know where they roost, we know, whenever we find any, a bat, we run out there with surveyors to make sure we can, we don't accidentally upset them when we're doing our new extension. When it comes to the quality of the soil underneath our trees or our fields, we know very little about it, because it's not part of our legislative structure. So last year, I wrote a piece that suggested, okay, we've got a Future Generations Lab, a Future Generations Act in Wales. What we need is a Future Generations Lab, which actually puts the science behind how we get to where we say we want to go with the Future Generations Act, because we don't know what kind of landscape, for example, would give us all the benefits from our land. So we need our land to deliver energy generation, food, recreation, biodiversity, flood management, and. We have no idea really what a Welsh landscape that delivered that sustainably, being respectful to nature's boundaries, providing a decent amount of local prosperity. What's that look like? So I think the first thing I would do, I said this in fact in committee last week in the Senate. The first thing I would do would be increase the budget of the Future Generations Commissioner's office by 10 times.
Okay, he'll like you.
I saw Derek.
Oh, did you?
He's very pleased that I said that. Because without that kind of resourcing going into understanding how far we are away from our aspirations and how we get there, we can't hope to get there. We have we got this kind of destination in mind, this shining city on a hill of a sustainable Wales. I'm told Wales there will now, but no idea what the road looks like to get there. So I think the first thing I would be doing if I was King of Wales would be to really invest in foundational statistics, evidence, and science to understand just how productive Wales could be in different ways to meet our requirements. And the second thing I think I would have to be thinking about doing is understanding how we can have conversations that get away, and this is almost impossible, I guess, and it's why I'm an economist, not a politician, that get away from the kind of culture wars position we put ourselves in with farming, with a 20-mile speed limit, with cycling, with loads of different aspects, which are really important for our future, which have become a push-me-pull-you situation where nobody will sit in the middle of compromised ground and everybody is very fixed in their ways.
So what you're really saying here, you want research and evidence-based decision-making and a good, strong delivery model of it.
Yes. And then there's...
That's quite straightforward.
Well, it does. I mean, but I said this at a meeting I was at a rewilding farm in Monmouth earlier this week. And somebody kind of quite rightly said that my approach has a huge democratic deficit because I'm a natural technocrat, I guess, in many ways. And there needs to be somehow some dynamic democratic accountability in this process. You have to take it with you, and people have to tell you what they want, and you have to co-deliver it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think what we had in the last, I'm very old now. I remember.
You don't look that old.
I can remember the 1970s, so I'm quite old. I remember when a heat was a heat wave in 1976 when I had the first big one I can remember. And in that period since the 1970s, we've gone from being citizens to being consumers. So people's engagement in civic life, if you like, has narrowed immensely. And the kind of rush online to online platforms for social interaction has heightened that. So now if I want to meet a dozen people like me, I can do that online immediately.
Yes,
if I want to do that in my local community, I have to go to the pub and I have to go to many pubs and I have to sort through lots of interesting and annoying people before I find lots of Calvins who I would like very much. So our geographic communities are now not places where we discuss things in sometimes difficult circumstances with a wide range of people and have those conversations and have that civic engagement. So what you have, I think, now is, compared to when I was growing up through the miners' strike, a much lower level of engagement of people with the big issues of the day.
Okay.
So you don't get people who are interested in politics, interested in economics, interested in the environment and what's happening to it, except in quite a narrow sense.
Okay, can I be devil's advocate?
Yeah.
Could that be because of the community that you're from, that these conversations have being had, and other communities may be having those conversations?
So I think I'll push back and say yes, but.
Okay.
So I come from a very particular community, which is. I know. I've got a paper on this with a very.
Oh, I like it. You got a paper.
a very clever colleague from Cambridge. So I do actually have some evidence of this. So I do come from a community which is quite insular. Our set of communities which is quite insular and in a way have disengaged from some of the civic debate. That's absolutely true. In Wales, when I go to, for example, small rural communities, they engage with these issues, again, from quite a narrow perspective.
Yeah.
What would happen to Llanbedr if this goes forward? What will happen to Ynys Môn if that happens? And the farmers will have a particular view, foresters have a particular view. People have moved to the countryside to get away from cities and kind of have that idyllic lifestyle. Will have a very different view about how they view development in the locality, for example. So I think people naturally tend to be fairly narrow in their appreciation of the place they live, the resources that they see in front of them, how they want those used, the implication of the way they live, on the wider economy or climate or planet.
So what you're really saying is that they're able to comment on their close natural ecosystem, and that's what they talk about, not beyond that.
Yeah, and I think that I maybe have a slight kind of rose-tinted spectral view of this, but I think that's in my lifetime, a professional lifetime, has become worse, in part because we've seen a segregation of people by, for example, income type. So people are now much more likely to live near people who are like them in terms of their social background. You see this, people sort themselves into like-minded communities.
I've seen that as well.
So that happens a lot. So you don't. I mean, I think part of the problem.
Do
for
you
example,
still live in the exact community you grew up?
No, I live in.
Could it be that you've organised yourself a
I
bit?
absolutely have. So I was born in a place called Ferndale. I
Yes.
moved to the bright lights in the big city of Pontypridd.
Okay.
30,000 people. It's got a library. It's got a railway station and everything. The place that I'm from doesn't have a railway station. So yes, there's that kind of, there's this bit of that going on. And in fact, that it's interesting. The place I moved to Pontypridd in 1997, is becoming gentrified.
Oh.
So people are moving out of Cardiff because Ponty is relatively inexpensive to buy a house.
Yes.
So you can come down into town in 21 minutes on the train, and so that you see that happening as well. I think there is somehow, I think, a difference in the way that we live now compared to how we lived 40 years ago, in terms of the breadth of people we see on a day-to-day basis. Homeworking, again, is something which has affected that. What I've not seen in the Valley I thought would happen is the explosion of co-working spaces in Valley's towns. I thought that post-pandemic we'd see dozens of little kind of co-working spaces pop up where people would come together, to have good broadband, decent coffee, meet like-minded people or unlike-minded people, and have that kind of, that hasn't really happened. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why. And I think that means that there are less spaces for people to come together and to be faced with conflicting views and work them out.
Yes.
That may be it is a very personal view, but I think that's a problem.
But what would that lead on to long term then? If people are in their bubbles, operating on their own, not connecting with one another, but society still continuing to run?
Well, yeah, but I think people have less empathy. So, I mean, so I think part of the problem we have, so for example, with parliamentary politicians, this is particularly UK Parliament rather than the Senate, but you're a class of politicians who have not only never really had proper jobs, many of them, proper jobs, whatever that means, but also some of them never met a poor person, apart from stepping over them on the way to Parliament. And they sit on the
You
table.
can't say things like that, can you?
Yes, you can, because it's true. Because that the
So what you're
way in
saying is
which,
they're actually very disengaged with the society.
Yes.
There are very poor people around.
Yes, of course there are. But
I remember somebody that works quite senior in policy that turned around and goes, everyone has disposable income and they could all contribute to saving the climate. And I'm not against saving the climate. It's just the idea of that everyone has disposable income, and that your group of people might have disposable income.
let's take an example of just a paper I wrote about 10 years ago, which was about how you've seen the stratification of society, right?
Yes.
In the I say good old days, in the 1960s, the board of directors of, say, ICI, the paint company, the chemicals company, would have at least had a representation of people who had come up through the company and would have understood ICI and would have had some empathy and understanding of ICI's workforce in the UK, wherever they were. And then when they were faced with investment decisions, would have brought that history to bear on how they decided about ICI's future. But of course, now you have a situation where boards of directors of large companies typically have not got a background in the company. It's very much rarer to find people promoted through the organisation to very senior levels. Those boards of directors are typically professionals, accountants and lawyers and economists and people who have a profession of being a non-exec director type role. And it's very much easier, therefore, to offshore production in the company if you have no emotional connection to the company.
Yeah.
The last paper I wrote, one paper I wrote before I left academia was called The Trying for the Placeless. And that's about how people and institutions and firms that are able to move across places can lever resources, look for opportunities, invest easily, seamlessly, move out to that place when it becomes non-viable and someone's leave a mess behind. Those organisations have been very well rewarded in our current global capitalised system. And people who cannot do that, and organisations that don't do that, have been disadvantaged. And the example I always give is, if I'm a university professor, I was a university professor, I could basically work anywhere around the world, and I am in fact rewarded if I move. So if I get a very tiny violin now, but I was not a very well paid professor in the business.
Okay.
There were 3 bands, right? And I was on the lowest band.
Okay.
And the reason I did not ever get to the higher bands was because I never moved. I've only ever worked in Cardiff Business School. So I never went into my boss and said, I've been offered a higher salary job in Birmingham. Unless you give me a pay rise, I'm off.
Yeah.
I never did that.
Okay.
I wanted to work in Birmingham. Birmingham's a lovely town, don't get me wrong. But I never wanted to work there. Other people who jump around academia geographically have levered higher salaries based on their ability to
That
play
could
off.
be the same outside of academia as
It
well.
absolutely is the same. That's exactly the point. And what that means is that people who do that have to give up their place attachment. They have to leave their families, to leave their school friends or university friends, whatever it is, and they have to go and work in other places. And what you get, therefore, is people who have lesser place attachment make big decisions in society. So where's the first place Boris Johnson ever stood for Parliament?
Okay.
Do you know?
No, I would have thought London, but no.
You would think London, wouldn't you?
You would think London?
Yeah, Clwyd South.
Wow.
Right, 1987.
Okay.
Because parliamentary parties are exactly the same.
Yeah.
So the Labour Party, Stephen Kinnock, I'm sure he's a lovely guy. He had no knowledge of Port Talbot before he became the MP.
Yeah.
He was parachuted in the same way as Torsten Bellow has been into Swansea West, because it suits the Labour Party to put those people in the safe seats. So that it's not just about firms, it's not about people, it's about institutions as well that use geography in order to fulfil their own organisational objectives. And that's a problem.
You've obviously said, go outside of the current environment to obviously spread their wings, but many of them go back. Where's Boris Johnson now, if you think about it?
And luckily for Clwyd West, I suppose Clwyd South, not in Clwyd. So yes, they do. And I this paper, when I wrote it, I had a lot of pushback from other academic colleagues, obviously, who felt, I think, criticised, possibly rightly, possibly wrongly. And they would make the point that somewhere like Oxford, for example, or Cambridge, become home.
It becomes a hub of intelligence.
Yes, it absolutely does. So that's absolutely true. My argument would be that there are lots of places in the system which end up being exploited. So, and lots of those in Wales. So if you think about...
But could it be the weaker places get exploited?
They do. And that's my problem. It's a peripheral places.
You can't imagine Boris Johnson go, I'm going to go to Manchester, that's quite strong, and give a go there.
Yeah, exactly. So what you get is that and especially places which might be very rich in natural resources, but not so rich in social resources or social capital, I think end up... I don't find an impolite word for it, but they get shafted. Whether that's and this is a very different scale of it. But what happens in the Niger Delta with the oil exploitation and the mess that's made in the Niger Delta is because people who live there do not have the political power, social power,
or economic power
to be pushed back. And I think that is generically true about the way in which investments sometimes end up disadvantaging, exploiting places and people who don't have the ability to say, hold on, we don't want this here.
But one thing I really want to talk to you about, we've touched on with the topic of academia, we've spoken about papers and your academic life for 26 years. Talk me through the state of the academic world currently and how it used to be.
It's a mess. It's
in what sense?
So there has been, for the last 15 years in academia, if not longer, a big dirty secret. And the dirty secret is that international postgraduate students pay for everything.
Is that a secret?
It people haven't talked and thought about it until the last year or two.
Okay.
So the money paid by typically Asian students for 1 year master's courses.
When you say Asian students, can you break that down for us?
So in my particular school, it's usually been Chinese and or Indian, and those numbers fluctuate.
Yes.
But largely, those are the two big marks. There are other marks as well.
Both have a background in that school.
Yeah.
I've studied in the business school as well.
So there's some Malaysian students there. There's increasingly students from Nigeria.
It's quite well known, the Indian and Chinese students.
Those are the backbone of our international markets in the UK and certainly in Cardiff. And those students have been very profitable. At the same time, undergraduate teaching, particularly in things like medicine, physics, and engineering, is very expensive, and the undergraduate fees don't cover that.
Yes.
Research is expensive, and the money from UKRI, UK research structure, does not cover research cost fully. So the money that's come in year after year after year after year from international master's students has subsidised those other elements.
Is that across the board at all the departments in the university, or specifically the business school?
So there are some big players in the international markets. So business school is the biggest, and there are journalism school does quite well with international students, and other departments that do quite well with international students, and that money then flows across the rest of the universities, subsidised other disciplines. So it's both thematic in terms of master students supporting undergraduate and research, and discipline-wise
as well, I imagine.
Yeah, so business school. So, for example, when I was at the height of when I was deputy head of the business school, 56% of our income went to the university, and we kept less than half.
So, in essence, you were also a cash cow.
Yes, we absolutely would.
Yeah.
And since the pandemic, numbers obviously collapsed in the pandemic, haven't gone back up again, and that cash cow status has become A, really obvious, and B, a problem because the cash cow is no longer increasing.
I remember going back quite a few years when I was studying at the same business school, Cardiff Business School, undergraduate cohort for one of our programs. So my program was Business Administration BSc.
Yeah.
400 people you had on that. And the MBA, I think they had a little under 400, so I think with 300 odd students. And I thought that was I just thought that was normal across all programs. Then once you start going to other schools and speak to other students, they go, no, we've got this small classroom size, or we've got 100 or 150.
Yeah.
And I saw those numbers year on year, but then more recently I heard the numbers have dropped significantly.
So when we had lots of students coming from overseas, and he's a massive export earner for UK PLC.
What enticed them to come specifically to Cardiff?
This is not just Cardiff.
Okay.
This is across all top tier
Russell Group, should we say?
And then you would have other universities who are lower down that notional hierarchy, very notional hierarchy, but then they would have students with slightly lower entry requirements, still international students. So in our region, University of South Wales, Cardiff Metropolitan University have large numbers of international students as well. Across the board, that's the way the UK higher education system works. And when all the money's coming in, everyone's very happy. You get lots of research done. You pay professors, six-figure sums. It's very easy. As soon as the students stop coming and the money dries up, it's like, okay, big questions are asked about the social usefulness of what you're doing. And that's where I have a problem with.
No one complained about it before.
No. But now, when the money gets tighter, you get, unsurprisingly, maybe a Conservative government querying what these left-wing academics are doing. Now we've got the Labour government also querying what the left-wing academics are doing. And you can see how the social contract, or at least between higher education and the government, is broken down.
Yeah.
So the government now does not trust higher education does not trust the government. There's no obvious and easy way to bring those two things together, largely because, and the problem we've got in the university sector is we've been turning the handle on massive numbers of students for the last 20 years. And nobody's asked the question, what higher education is for. So, for example, in my school, your school, we have been training accountants year on year, not changing the course very much. Training lawyers in the law school year on year, not changing the course very much. When AI is coming along and completely wiping out all those jobs, right? Those jobs will be, majority of those jobs will just be gone in 10 years. They already are going. but we just turn the hand on the students, send them out there, and
In a
there's no
sense,
dynamism or
isn't there a question about ethics then of these courses?
yes, of course it is. It absolutely is. And I think the same would happen when. So one of the proudest boasts I have on my academic career is I only ever took on 5 PhD students, right?
Okay.
In all those years.
I know one of your PhD students.
Every one of those PhD students got a job in academia.
Yeah.
Right? Not many professors would be able to say that because most we train 10
Maybe
times as
recruited
many.
them to, okay, what are you looking to do next? We'll help.
But we train 10 times as many PhD students as there are
Yes.
jobs for them, which is highly unethical.
Yeah.
Because we're pretending they can have a career as an academic and use their PhD to the full, and typically they can't.
Yeah.
So there's lots of difficult little conversations to be had about what academia is for, and how much we can afford to pay. I mean, I got a really good wage as a professor. People in my business school was a very well paid school, relatively speaking, get more money than I was getting, and lots of them just write papers and maybe teach smallest classes. You think, well, that's a lot of money for something which might not have that much social impact.
But is that down to how we view academia? Because I think there's a really big push with some of these universities when you start looking at, really, it's not how well you are in the classroom or lecture room, it's those papers, those publications, and the weight, and also how a professor's treated down to the paper he or she has published.
So that has been the way we have promoted people for decades, and it's fundamentally flawed. Because the ability to write papers and get them into what are typically big American journals,
Yes.
which is where you get the big kudos, does not necessarily reflect what we would call in the business the public value.
Yes.
Those outputs. Those outputs might be theoretically interesting. They might be methodologically innovative. Do they make a difference to anyone's life?
But
Sometimes
also
not.
those kind of papers, to get to the big journals, the top journals, are often quantifiable. The stats, data, a lot of the juicy parts of the nuances, the conversation, the qualitative side of things are somewhat lost within that, because if you're going to go 4-star, what are they looking for mostly?
So we're back where the conversation started, aren't we? About what economics is and how it loses that nuance in order to deliver something which is quantitatively ends up in an actual result out of your model, which solves itself to give you a number.
Yeah,
so
abstractly.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I want to move on to talking about sustainability. So obviously, when you talk about academia and sustainability, one thing that comes to mind in the data set is male professors and the amount of carbon connected to them compared to other groups within academia. What are your thoughts on it?
So I did a piece of work on this when I was deputy head of the business school, and before, in fact. And yeah, it turns out that professors fly about twice as far as junior staff, and men fly about 80% further than women. So there's a huge carbon burden associated with academia, business travel, conference travel, largely in business and social sciences. That has to massively reduce.
Yeah.
It's misallocated. So professors travel to the same things to the same people they've been talking to the last 20 years.
They're friends.
Yes. Whereas younger members of staff can't get the money to fly, not often. And the younger members of staff, the ones who have the ideas and need the networks to develop to get those ideas out. So that misallocation of what is already too big a carbon burden is a real problem. And I did suggest in the business school that we have an individual carbon budget for academics, and that reduced every year. So you start off with 4 tons, then you go to 2 tons, then to 1 ton. That didn't go down very well.
And why didn't it go down that well?
Who knows? Who knows why people don't like my ideas? I got terrible reputation as a professor who's trying to stop flying, and that's. I think that genuinely people didn't like.
They might be looking at it. He's one of us, and he's trying to stop.
Well, I mean, I haven't flown for a long time. That's not. I do fly very occasionally, and I made the choice not to leave Europe 15 years ago. And I haven't.
Is that linked to carbon?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
So I absolutely thought that this was, and I think I would rather Cardiff reduce its carbon and travel footprint, and we could just be the best business school in Europe, and just do stuff in Europe.
But isn't that fairly straightforward? Just speak to the gang of male professors.
Well, I did try, but for some reason they weren't receptive to my ideas.
No,
and I can understand because people have established relationships and friendships in China and Australia and South America. And there's me saying, actually, you know what, folks? This is just inappropriate.
And that's why you're no longer in
And that's why
academia.
I'm no longer acting. And that's why lots of people probably can't see the back of me. And to be fair, I can see why. I understand that. I come from a privileged position of having a small number of those sorts of connections. So I've never really travelled that far. I did in the early days. So it's, in a way, it's easy for me to say stop doing research in China because I don't do research.
Because you don't do it. Okay.
So I completely understand I'm coming from a privileged position, but at the same time, the world's burning, and we're helping burn it.
In terms of sustainability in Wales, what are the three top things that Wales is facing right now in terms of sustainability and issues around?
Landscape-related carbon emissions or methane emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. So we're covered in 80+% of Wales is covered in farms, which are really high emitters and very low value added in terms of the products. So that's the one big thing you look at and say, that's the first thing you'd worry about. 5 million tons of carbon plus per annum.
Is this commonly known about?
I think so, but it's not being dealt with, really. The sustainable farming scheme is not going to do much about that, I don't think. The second thing, housing stock. I mean, I did a project for a housing association a couple of years ago, which looked at the prospects of improving the housing stock to make it more climate friendly, more energy efficient. It's really, really hard with particularly old council houses. A lot of the house I live in is 120 years old. It's built from rubble, basically. It's a stone-built single skin house, Victorian era, 1904. It's very, very hard to make that carbon neutral, climate net zero. It's really, really difficult. So housing stock is the second thing. And the third thing is the politics. I think, we will have to make some really difficult decisions, whether it's about landscape use, whether it's about housing retrofit, whether it's about industry and all transport and other things. Cardiff, for example, is a city which doesn't have a congestion charge, or ULEZ. So Bristol has one.
I'm surprised you say the politics side. I would put Wales very advanced, mature in terms of sustainability, in terms of politics and legislation.
We talk a good game. We write some really good laws, and they don't get implemented properly.
Okay,
sufficiently.
When you say we write some good laws, for example,
the Future Generations Act is great. The Environment Act is great, in theory, but the Environment Act has not cleaned up our rivers. And we, as a board member of Natural Resources, I can see why that's happened. I can see the problems with engaging with really important sectors like agriculture in terms of behaviour change and so on. But the politics has got to a place, at the top of culture was earlier, where it's really hard to make progress without people immediately dragging you back to where you started.
So the
politics is, you can have, and what we find is some of the ministers who I think have been the most radical ministers have left government or are leaving the government at the end of this Senate term. And it's interesting to see what will happen next time. There'll be a different government, different shaped government, because the Senate is changing in its constituency.
Different viewpoints.
Many more Senate members. There won't be a majority government, I don't think, of any one party. So politics will change.
Okay.
That may unblock, in the best case, some of that logjam.
This is me just coming towards the end of our session here. I've got some quick fire questions for you.
Okay.
So we've got to know you a bit more in terms of being an economist, an academic, someone from the valleys as well. If you didn't take the career path that you have done so, what would you have been doing?
My band was basically the only one that didn't get signed from South Wales.
You say band, you mean
music band,
yes.
In the 1990s. So I'm a failed rock star, I'm a failed screenwriter, I've got an unpublished novel. So definitely one of those three things would have been something quite cool.
In terms of your greatest piece of work, what would you say that is? Or was?
Great piece of work. I would probably say that the best thing I've ever done is represent Wales in the International Snow Sculpting Competition in Milwaukee in 1996, where we won the People's Choice Award.
Okay.
That's the only time I got a cap for Wales, and I probably look back more fondly on it.
Congratulations.
Apart from the birth of my children, of course.
Of course. Outside of academia, what do you like doing? What are your hobbies?
I like playing my guitar. I like reading a lot of sci-fi, which is very good in the future space. So I do a lot of work in the future space. I like being at home, and I love cake. Cake's great.
Okay. If you could have changed one thing in academia, what would it have been? You could change it now if you want as well, going forward.
My God, that's quite difficult, isn't it? I would make universities responsible to their local communities, not to some notional, fuzzy international order or council.
Okay. How do you want to be remembered now you've walked out that academic life? I've got another nice question straight after this one.
I actually would like to be remembered as an absolute pain in the arse who's clearly doing it for the right reasons.
Okay. How do you think they will remember you in academia?
As an absolute pain in the arse, but not necessarily someone who's doing it for the right reasons.
Okay, fantastic. That's me rounding up the question. I've got one final question from the previous guest. That was Derek Walker. So he's a Future Generation Commissioner. He knows you very well, he mentioned. I've got his question here. So his question is, you've recently written about the closure of the Port Talbot steelwork. So in terms of blast furnace, we're looking for a just transition in terms of the actual economy. So what can be done more so to ensure a just transition takes place here to a low carbon economy?
I think the key thing is to engage with communities early and deeply to make them understand that when a job leaves, it doesn't mean an opportunity leaves.
Yes.
And opportunities can take a wide range of forms. I've always said for a long time that people in Wales tend to be job takers, not job makers. We're really good at doing a job who gives us a job. Ask us to invent a job is much harder. I think that making that work, community level, not necessarily individual level, but giving communities the space, the autonomy, the resources to create their own enterprise, entrepreneurialism, work in ways which are fit for a new world would be a really good thing to attempt.
Fantastic. So this brings us to the closure of the actual podcast episode. It's tradition that I hand you over my notepad and you write the next question for the next guest. But for now, I'd like to thank you for taking part in this podcast.
Thank you very much, Hush.
It's been very insightful for me, I'm sure for the viewers as well.
Thank you.